Welcome, everybody. I'm happy to present finally this magnificent opportunity to hear from Jason Stanford. Welcome to the Global Justice Report, an online production of the Center for Global Justice. I'm Roberto Robles, your host for today's program. The Center for Global Justice, el Centro para la Justicia Global, is a multinational and bilingual research center located in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. The center is devoted to research and learning for a better world and empowering a solidarity economy. Due to the pandemic, we have discontinued our in-person events and instituted online webinars. Without our previous revenue-generating programs, we now depend on your donations to support these webinars and to be able to continue to pay our Mexican staff. So you can donate at our website, www.globaljusticecenter.org. I'm very happy to introduce you. Jason Stanford is one of the authors of a very interesting book, Forget the Alamo, analyzing the heroic Anglo myth. He's one of the authors. The other is Brian Burrock and Chris Tomlinson. So welcome, Jason. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Roberto. And thank you to the Center for Global Justice for having me to talk about this book. It's very exciting to talk to you, and I appreciate the invitation. The book didn't start out, though, to talk about anything resembling global justice, or we didn't decide to write a book about the heroic Anglo myth of Texas. It started out with three guys at brunch, and Chris Tomlinson was talking about a column he was writing, and he's a columnist for the San Antonio and Houston papers. And he was writing about this plan to spend $500 million to redevelop the Alamo, the site in the center of San Antonio. It had become kind of tacky, frankly. There's the Alamo we all think it is, the building with the Taco Bell facade and the long barracks and the little park there, and the gift shop, which is wonderfully important to them. And then there's the streets in front of the Alamo, which is actually the Alamo. Not only is that where many people died during the siege of the Alamo, but that is also an unrecognized graveyard for Native Americans who worked with the early Spanish settlers 300 years ago. And then on the opposite side of the street, there are some tourist attractions, which used to be part of the wall of the Alamo. So it was, as a historical site, it was a disaster, is and continues to be. And yet Chris was saying that spending money to fix this up, this historical site, which is also the top tourist attraction in Texas, was a bad idea. And we're kind of surprised. And he said, because the story of the Alamo that we all think we know is based on a white supremacist myth. And we're trying to get lots of young people to move to Texas to work in tech and all these other industries. And they don't care about this, the fact that they don't care about Davy Crockett. They don't care about Jim Bowie. They don't care about this heroic story about how these settlers came to Texas and won our freedom against that evil tyrant Santa Anna. I moved to Texas when I was 23. My biggest association with the Alamo was Pee Wee Herman. But Brian had been raised in Texas. He'd taken 2 years of Texas state history. And he was kind of surprised to hear all this. Brian's not an unsophisticated guy. He's written 3 New York Times bestsellers. He understands the world. But he didn't understand that the story he'd been raised on in Texas was largely a lie. And Brian told him more about it all, about the role of slavery in the creation of Texas. And Brian, who understands the business side of being an author really well, he said, well, that would be a book. That'd be a good book. And I'm like, yeah, thanks, Brian. And so we just went on eating our eggs and talking about something else. And then Brian clearly had been thinking about this the whole time. And he interrupted us and he said, and you should call it Forget the Alamo. At that point, all our shoulders slumped and we were depressed because we realized we had just then ruined the next 2 years of our lives. If any of you out there harbor any illusions of writing a book being fun, I'd like to quickly disabuse you of them. It's hard. In any case, 2 days later, we had a book deal. It was a great idea. And we set out to write this book about everything you think you know about the Alamo is wrong. And largely speaking, that's true, because what people think of the Alamo is mostly based on Fess Parker and John Wayne. The Disney series in the 50s, followed by John Wayne's movie in 1960, largely form what people think they know about the Alamo. Everything else is now a reaction to that. So we got to talk about how Davy Crockett actually surrendered and was executed later that morning. He didn't go down swinging old Betsy and killing a rising mountain of dead Mexican soldiers. There was no line in the sand. More importantly, they didn't knowingly give up their lives to buy Sam Houston time. They tell the story like a Christ myth. These good people, or maybe they were flawed, but at this moment of crisis, they knowingly gave up their lives, sacrificed their lives to buy Sam so that their fellow man can live. The truth is they were trapped. They were ordered to raise the Alamo. Sam Houston told them to destroy it because why would you want to defend a fort against like that? You don't do that. It's a dumb military move. And their egos got the better of them. Jim Bowie and William Travis wanted to prove their manhood. These are very romantic young men. And so they went in there and they discounted all of the Mexican scouts, or the Tejano scouts rather, who told them that Santa Anna was a month ahead of schedule. Again, like they got trapped in late March when it was really cold. They expected Santa Anna to march up when it was a bit warmer. And they discounted all of the scouts because they were Hispanic and he thought they might be, they discounted them as possible spies. So when Santa Anna showed up a month ahead of time, they didn't really know they were going to have to fight Santa Anna's army. They weren't even sure that he was coming. And so they offered to surrender and they were told, sure, but we're going to kill you all because you're pirates. So they decided not to. And the night before the siege ended, they offered to surrender again and had the same answer. So no, they didn't knowingly give up their lives. They were trapped. And whatever bravery resulted after that, good for them. But what they don't talk about in school is that about a third to half of them ran. And I certainly don't begrudge them running when they're being overrun by the Mexican army, but they didn't stand bravely and fight. They ran and tried to find and they were cut down by the Mexican cavalry. That's what we thought the book was going to be about, really just fact checking the textbooks. But then one day, we were trying to find Mexican-American academics and historians who'd been debunking this myth all along. We figured that this was out there, right? That we documented all the Anglo historians who'd been creating this myth all along, first to turn a military disaster into basically a recruiting story to help Sam Houston, excuse me. And then later to turn Texas from a former slave state into the new West. They wanted to very consciously position Texas as not part of the Confederate South, but as part of the West. And the Alamo is the story they told. It was part of a rebranding of Texas, if you will, 50 years after the Revolution. But we couldn't find many Mexican-American academics or historians who'd been messing with this. And we sat down with a guy named Andres Tijerina. He's the godfather of Mexican-American history in Texas. And that's because before he started studying it, it did not exist as a discipline. In fact, when he showed up to the University of Texas to seek his doctorate, in Mexican American history, he was told explicitly there was no such thing. So he just started auditing classes and doing quite well until they let him into the program. And I think he's still teaching these days at a community college. And he told us two surprising things that influenced the book. One is that this is the Alamo myth, that creation myth of knowingly sacrificing themselves to win freedom and blah, blah, blah. That's largely a white people story that excludes the original residents of Mexico from their state's creation myth. And that isn't something that Mexican Americans who were achieving anything in academia wanted to spend time on. They wanted not to spend time on the story that excluded them. They wanted to spend time on telling the stories that hadn't been told. And then he said something incredibly important. He grew up in Texas as the son of migrant workers, and he took 7th grade history in a little town in West Texas called Odessa. And he remembers the day his teacher pointed at him, said, "Andy, stand up." Called him Andy instead of Andres because she did. And she said, "Kids, look at Andy. It could have been his grandparents who killed Davy Crockett." And we were shocked by that. So we started asking other folks his age and even younger if they'd ever experienced anything like that. And this entire book could have been made up of the experiences of Mexican Americans in Texas who have been made through the instruction of Texas state history to feel like second-class citizens in a state that used to be their own country. It is, as one person told us, the original sin of Texas, and that Mexican Americans are the bad guys in this story. And it explained to me why, when I first moved to Texas when I was 23, that people would casually refer to anyone of Hispanic or descent as Mexican, and why they became second-class citizens in the first place. Because right after the Texas Revolution, all a white person had to do to take over a ranch in South Texas was to accuse the rancher of cheating him, or worse, and he knew that that the Texas Rangers would back him up. And so a lot of ranching families became migrant worker families. And since then, those stories have been passed down in families. And we've had this awful dichotomy in Texas where one thing is taught at school and it is believed in white homes. And you go home to a Mexican American family, and sometimes your dad's going to tell you what really happened. And not only do Mexican Americans, three things happen to that Mexican American kid. One, they internalize that they are the outsider. They're the outsider in what used to be Mexico. They're the outsider in this state, or they're the bad guy. Or two, they disassociate themselves with it. And to me, that explains a little bit why we have lower Hispanic voting participation rates than California, because we tell a story where they don't matter in the state. And so they think, well, that's public life that's white people's business. And they just don't associate with it. I remember a friend of mine who's the chief of staff of a state legislator here. And the state legislator first got elected to a state Senate district that includes the Alamo in San Antonio. And he rented a bus, and he got all of these community leaders in his district that includes the Alamo to take a tour with him of the district. And they went to the Alamo, and everyone got off and was really excited. And they were wondering, why are you guys so excited to see the Alamo? I mean, you must have seen it 100 times. But it was the first time that most people on this bus had ever visited the Alamo. It's in the center of the brownest big city in the country. And most of the people there don't mess with the Alamo. They know that that's white people's history. So they either disassociate, and it becomes their relationship to their own state's history becomes they're the other. They're othered by it, and it quickly became one of our goals in this book to, one, give a platform to guys like Andres Tijerina, who'd been saying this all along. And there weren't a ton of them messing with it, but every time anyone had ever said anything about what actually happened at the Alamo, they had been shouted down, laughed at, or most commonly completely ignored. And so we wanted to make sure they got a fair hearing, more than fair. But what the book also became about, especially to me, is how the story of the Alamo has been used. This is a story a lot like Thermopylae, or the myth is, and it was consciously told to be a lot like that, like the Spartans and the Greeks. It's a lot like Pearl Harbor. It is the violence that demands revenge. And Remember the Alamo is a lot like Never Forget when it comes to 9/11, or Remember Pearl Harbor. It is the thing you tell yourself to put some steel in your spine when you're going to war. Lyndon Johnson, of course, referenced the Alamo to ridiculous extent during Vietnam. The Alamo was mentioned after the attack at Pearl Harbor. There were a lot of people in Congress mentioning the Alamo after 9/11. One of them even called Saddam Hussein a modern day Santa Ana, which is actually, in retrospect, a horrible insult to Santa Ana. I remember asking the curator of the Alamo about this, and he said, in San Antonio, it's a very military city. There are lots of bases there. And so troops would come back from Iraq and Afghanistan and do it, go to a base in San Antonio for a while. Or there are a lot of medical facilities. And it is pretty common to see soldiers taking field trips through the Alamo. And he said there's only one Alamo in San Antonio, but so many soldiers showed them pictures of their little forward bases called the Alamo, that he said there are hundreds of Alamos in Iraq and Afghanistan. That is how deeply we have internalized this story as a story about our military justification for doing what we want. First, it was for a bunch of white slave owners to secede from Mexico. And then it was for in World War II, Vietnam, and now Iraq and Afghanistan. It also has become a symbol of resistance in this country. The most common gun rights symbol we see is the come and take it with an AR-15 in the middle. Well, the come and take it flag was from the Texas Revolution, when the white settlers didn't want to give up the cannon to the Mexican army that they had been given by the Mexican government. So yeah, we messed around it and wrote this story. Three middle-aged white guys, one of whom voted for Romney, it was not me, wrote this story about how white supremacy was behind the creation of Texas, and it had been made to make what is becoming the dominant population in Texas feel like second-class citizens in their own state, which is not at all the book we thought we were going to write when we started out, or when we thought at brunch it would be a really fun idea. I knew, because my background's in politics, I knew that this would become a campaign issue. I knew that Republicans would have to say they were against the book if we got a little profile. What I did, and that happened, the book came out, and at first there were some Republican activists who were attacking the book, mainly because we had the temerity to attack their cherished myth. And then state legislators were attacking us. And the state Republican Party chairman attacked us as, what did he call us? Nefarious cancer culture cretins, which at least, and he did that that was his Flag Day message. He used his Flag Day message to attack our book, which I'd never felt so patriotic. But 3 weeks after the book came out, we were supposed to have a virtual book event at the State History Museum. And it was really just gonna be Brian and Chris, because I had work. And 3 hours before the event, it was called off. They said it's canceled. Sorry, can't do it. And it quickly became a huge issue. It got national coverage, and then we were planning on filing all sorts of open records requests and digging into it to find out who was really behind it. The next day, the lieutenant governor just said it. He ordered the State History Museum to cancel our event, because in his words, our book was a fact-free retelling of state history. Had we been fact-free, I imagine he would have been just fine with us being in the State History Museum, but there you go. Censorship has a lot of downfalls, and I'm certainly not here to endorse it, but there is no better way to publicize a book than getting it banned. And within a few days, we'd sold out Amazon, and a week after that, we made the New York Times bestseller list. So I better write another book, because right now that's the first line of my obituary. I've got plenty more to say, but I would much rather answer your questions. So if anyone has any questions, please let me know.
Yes, thank you, Jason.
You're welcome.
The opportunity is open for anyone who wants to raise a question, a comment. Just raise your hand, please, and proceed.
Jason.
Yes, sir, Joe.
Yeah, hi, Jason. Could you tell us a little bit about the 1836 project and
Oh my God, yes.
that? Most people probably don't know about that, but.
So everyone's probably heard of the 1619 project, right?
Right.
That has got everyone very upset. And everyone's all the Republicans in this country are taking turns trying to oppose it. And one thing they did when our book came out is they started the 1836 project to defend Texas against the attack on Texas history, much in the same way that the 1619 project attacked the basic assumptions of American history. And they were going to do this by assembling a group of historians to advise the governor on a proper understanding of Texas history, and then to hand out a pamphlet at the DMV, which of course is how everyone learns history, pamphlets at the DMV. And it's funny you bring that up. So two things. One, they reached out to us and asked if we wanted to come talk to them. And they said, they referred to our book as a novel, which I thought was either really great shade or hilariously ignorant. Either way, I'm happy. And we're not going to talk to them. But I did get a handle on the draft of the brochure that they're going to hand out at the DMV. And Joseph, let me tell you, I bet you it's not going to be anything like the final draft, because slavery is all over it. They mentioned slavery and the role of the creation of Texas and the settling of Texas. Yeah, this sucker is never going to see daylight, but I'm going to write about it soon. Yeah.
Okay, we have Walter here.
Yes, hi. I guess my question is, when talking about the mythology of the Alamo, I mean, it sounds an awful lot like kind of the lost cause mythology in Civil War historiography. And for many years, mainstream American historians, people like Eric Foner, going back to David Potter, just lots and lots of people have been lambasting that theory and talking about, you know, the proper way of understanding the Civil War in relation to slavery. And part of that is the history of Texas annexation, which in that body of literature has always been treated as an aspect of the expansion of slavery.
Right.
So when you talk about that this is like a secret that nobody had known about, or that historians hadn't talked about, it may be did you have communication with those people? I mean, that's
okay.
a body of historiography that there's no dispute in that world.
No, none.
About
so
that.
there are serious historians in Texas who would quibble with our thesis that slavery is at one of the motivating factors in the split of Texas from Mexico. But there is no real debate among, as you say, there's no real debate among historians about this. The trick has always been, how do you get the history into the textbooks in Texas? And for 150 years, they have been failing to do that because the myth is so politically useful. The myth is so politically sacrosanct here, though, that talking about this in public is considered impolite, right? It's not just that the politicians can't win elections if they're talking about this. It's that you just don't bring it up. This is like, this is the equivalent of trying to suggest that George Washington didn't really cut down the cherry tree and being shunned from society. It's really, there's a ton of energy put around propping up this myth in popular academic, high school and below, and in political circles. Academics, they all know it. Historians, they all know this. That the ones who advise the politicians who have to vote on the state curriculum all know it. They just know they can only get so much history past the politicians. That's the problem here. There is no problem in Texas to discuss the role of slavery in the creation of the country and the Civil War, anything like that. But that's not a problem in a history class. To discuss the role of slavery in the creation of Texas, though, is considered impolite. It's political heresy here.
Like you can't talk about religion or politics. Yeah. Well, the same thing is, I run for school board here in Berkeley on a regular basis every 2 years. And a lot of it has to do with, who we are as represented by the structures public school.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the elucidating things, my strike debt group, DEBT, decided to do readings. And one of the readings has been The Dawn of Everything. So one of the things that gets taught in about 3rd or 4th grade is who the original people were, and they might go back maybe 7,000, as much as 7,000 years. And of course, I just saw a program on PBS about people on the Burren in Ireland being 33,000 years ago. So the myth, and also the people have always been like us. They have always arranged communities and studies and elaborated their societies in the same ways that we are familiar with, that we do. And so it's a totally opposite teaching in the early grades, because school is an indoctrination process. Public schooling, it's and it laps over. If you're going to get a certificate to do teaching any place, you have to comply with state standards and requirements, and that goes on. This is the history of us, and you've got it. It's like religion, you got to believe it because we say so.
Well, ideally, you'd believe it because it's true. And it's not completely false. I mean, there is an Alamo in San Antonio, and some people died there. But what I find most fascinating, and what I wish they'd actually teach, is how the story has been told, because we've been living with the story longer than they fought at the Alamo. Like, the story to me is so much more important to us, and it's not just that it's been told for a specific purpose, but that we have worked so hard to maintain it when it's really hard to back it up with facts. And we're asked to believe things that have pretty obvious logical gaps in them. And everyone just goes, oh, that's the truth. And yeah, the idea that people just, they look blankly at me when I say, oh no, they didn't buy him any time. Santa Anna's army was still catching up when they were done with this, when they were done with the siege. And it is just this article of faith that has been handed down from generation to generation, that the whole purpose of the Alamo was to buy him time. And to suggest that they all died for nothing and it was stupid and they shouldn't have been there in the first place, boy, that's mean here. That hurts people's feelings in a real way, where talking about, getting back to the bit about the lost cause, talking about how, the states' rights versus slavery argument in the Civil War is not something people are as emotionally attached to here. Or at least, I'm sure there's some. I've met some Civil War reenactors one who hilariously said that the Civil War was caused by the hat tax in South Carolina, which I got to give him credit for. That's a big swing. But we really have no problem in Texas talking about slavery when it comes to anything else but ourselves.
So how angry are you?
Oh, just generally?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it
Well,
laps over into everything,
yeah, and especially after Friday. I tell you, I used to work in politics. Now I work in public schools, and my wife took over my political consulting company, and she's plenty angry for both of us. And I think I I have to be the optimistic, supportive one right now, because I think she's going to burn the sky. She's so angry. Yeah, I don't blame her.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yes,
Jason, I think we're all furious. But let me ask, I'm assuming the lieutenant governor is not going to ask you back to the museum, which is too bad. But have you found other good audiences in Texas and elsewhere that are receptive to the book and what you're talking about?
Yeah, so one fact about writing books for mass market is your most common reader looks like me, middle-aged white guy. And so we had to write the book in a way where everyone would be included, right? We couldn't write the book for any one point of view. We have a point of view, clearly, but people who didn't agree with us would have to feel brought in and included and not shamed and blamed for believing something that wasn't their fault in the first place. And for the most part, I think that's true. My politically mercurial to conservative father-in-law was thrilled with the book, and I think that's largely because, like a lot of people, I mean, he knows he's being lied to, and we explained how he's been lied to. And some people feel like me, feel relief when the scales are fall from your eyes. I remember I did one event like this, and you could see everyone's face up there, and this is in the early days of the book launch. And I was really kind of wary about older white boomer men who were emotionally attached to the story, who would be angry at us. Even, because it cuts across all political persuasions in Texas. You don't have to be a political conservative to love the Alamo story. And there was one guy and this one event, and he was up there the whole time. He had this long, short, kind of longish gray hair, one of those dudes, and he looked like a confident sort, and he was just you could tell he was paying attention, and he looked kind of irritated, but I didn't know. So I knew he was going to ask something in Q&A. And finally he raised his hand, and I was like, okay, here it comes. And he said, I want to thank you for writing this book, because now I can have more honest conversations with my Hispanic friends. That it's not like, Hispanic friends don't bring it up in Texas. And, and they were just thrilled that he knew, and they were able to talk about it and the experience of this story and how it affected their lives. So that was one audience that has really responded to the book. Another are younger Mexican Americans in Texas who had been told at home all along that they were right and school was teaching them wrong. And I remember we did one in San Antonio in the county commissioner's courthouse, and there's tons of security there because this book can generate some heat. And this young Latina judge stood up and held up the book and said, thank you for writing this book. You showed me how my dad was right all along. That her dad had once dragged her out of the Alamo and had been yelling at her mom, saying, don't you ever bring my children in that place again. That place is full of lies. And I can't imagine how crazy making, I meant to mention this earlier, that this would make you crazy, right? For us, being told lies and then finding out they're wrong is a little easier than going to school, learning one thing, going home and being told you're lied to. And in order to succeed at school, you have to be able to parrot back the lie. And not everyone has a dad like that. But the people who do have to live in two different worlds at the same time and know that, and maybe not be for sure about who's lying, but know that those worlds aren't the same worlds. And they, and if they do know, like the Castros, Joaquin and Julian, their mom was it 10 years ago or so, popped off about the Alamo to a New York Times writer, talked about what a bunch of drunks and criminals they all were. And it became this huge issue, so bad that that political class in San Antonio of the Hispanic political class, they know to shut up about the Alamo. I couldn't get an interview with either Castro for this book. And I used to work for them. They've just learned not to talk about it, but they've been reading it. So that's good.
They
Yeah.
could get a job because they said those things. You have to comply with adhering to it in order to get a job, which is the truth of our lives in this country.
Well, and then then you get to college and they have no problem teaching you the truth. Funny thing. Yeah. So I speak to college classes all the time. They're teaching the book in college in Texas and public colleges. I remember my youngest son, he did his first year of college last year at University of Texas at San Antonio, and he took Texas history. And he texted me a picture of his class one day, and a picture of the cover of my book was up on the screen in front of the room. So you can only control so much in this state because it's awfully big and messy. And it's really funny about how you show up to college not knowing the very basics of your state history, even though you took it for 2 whole years in Texas. Let me give you an example. This one woman who we interviewed for the book, she would always start the first day of Texas history at the college level by asking the following question: who won the Battle of the Alamo? Now in Texas, we did a poll for this book, and we didn't put it in the book, but a majority of Hispanics in Texas get that answer wrong, because it is taught in such a way that the American, the white guys were such the good guy. Well, they must have won, right? It's little kid logic. Well, you're making such a big deal about this. It can't be a loss. But then it also gets kind of esoteric, because she has majority Hispanic students at the college she taught at. It was also UTSA. And they would raise their hand and they would say, "We did." And then she'd say, "Who's we?" Because the Alamo gets at a real basic question of who we are in Texas. Like, are we this version of Texas that we'd like to think of ourselves as, pugnacious freedom fighters, or are we the people who lived here before? And in the way that they're wrestling over the redevelopment of the Alamo and building a museum there, what they focus on is the big political question. Are they going to focus on the 13 days of the siege, or are they going to focus on the 300 years when the Spanish fellows first showed up and recruited the indigenous population to help them? They're still buried out there in the road right in front of the Alamo.
Well, college is another segregating structure. It creates that elite, and people turn on people who've gone to college and know a couple of things. There's an opposition to knowing too much, and that elitist kind of thing that college has become. I mean, it's called higher education for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And it's talking about a separate group of people. It's not talking about us. We should have college at the age of kindergarten. We should start out in college.
Yeah, the order in which we teach subjects in this country was determined shortly after World War II and hasn't changed. There's no reason, for example, not geography. There's no reason math should be taught in the order that it's taught in like you could learn calculus in elementary school.
Right.
Yeah.
Which that movie proved. What was that? Stand
and Deliver?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, a friend of mine, he taught calculus in inner city Boston in elementary schools, and no one believed it was possible.
And they don't ever, when they teach World War II, they don't ever teach, it's hard to call it U.S. complicity because it was ruling class complicity. It was the wealthy, and that's kind of and now I'm calling those hegemonic alliances, but it's that supported getting Hitler to march from Germany, intending for him to march to the Soviet Union and topple their revolution.
Yeah. Well, fat lot of good that did.
Well, except for killing so many millions of Russians, my God.
Yep.
Okay, so is there any person who wants to raise a comment, a question? Or is it time to finish the session? Okay, so well, let me give you our thanks, Jason. Was very, very interesting. And obviously we have the invitation to get and to read the book. Sounds very, very interesting. Today's webinar, as well as past program, are available on YouTube, accessible from our website, www.globaljusticecenter.org. All right. Next session, a week from today, we have this webinar, Prospects for Socialism in the 21st Century, with Radhika Desai, at the same hour on the same channels. Okay, so I hope you could make it. And
thank you, everyone.
finally,
Sorry, go ahead.
pardon me.
No, please go ahead. I interrupted. I apologize.
Okay, well, finally, I would like to thank our webinar team, Liz Mestres, Gregory Dament, Olivia Canales, Bob Stone, Betsy Bowman, and Cliff Durand. So this is Roberto Robles signing
Oh,
off.
can I say another comment before we close this? You know, we usually go for another hour or so, but anyway, so in case anybody has some more thoughts that promote Jason's commentaries, I've been doing some research. I listened to a speech. I read a speech by Putin, which explains why the US hegemony has been attacking the Soviet Union or the ex-Soviet Union for 110 years, and that this Ukraine thing is just more of the same, attacking the ex-Soviet Union because the Bolshevik Revolution frightens our owning class so badly. So I put my my email address in the chat in case you would like me to send you the link to his to Putin's speech and to discuss the idea that the US is not the hero once again in the events.
Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you very much. See you next time.
Thank you, everyone. It was fun.
Thank you. Very good.